Members, it is the appointed time and we have a quorum. I call to order the meeting. We will now invite the government officials to join us. In the meantime, I will consult members whether we need to conduct a public consultation. Should we invite public submission via writing or in person? It seems that members prefer public submission in writing. I will invite the Secretariat to put up a notice on the website to invite public submissions in writing then. We welcome the Secretary, Mabel Chan, and her team. Please be seated. We have just decided that we will invite public submission in writing. Ms. Mabel Chan, ready when you are. Thank you, Chairman and members. This is the first meeting of the Bills Committee. I and my team are pleased to attend the meeting. Members, if you would like to ask questions, please press the button. So this is a very familiar topic, but allow me to spend a few minutes to walk members through the policy intentions and the highlights of the bill. On last Wednesday, the government introduced the Road Traffic Amendment Ride-Hailing Service Bill 2025 into LegCo to introduce a regulatory regime for ride-hailing services. This is a very complicated issue. Over the years, many stakeholders' interests were involved, and there's been a lot of controversies on the issue. Now, this time of the government upholds the principle of healthy and competitive environment and also the safety and interests of passengers. Through regulating ride-hailing services, we would like to provide members of the public with more options for transport. We will also like to attract more young people to join the trade and introduce a competitive environment for the benefits of the whole trade. In July this year, we have consulted the panel on transport concerning our framework. Members gave unanimous support for the regulation of online ride-hailing services. Now, to implement the framework as soon as possible, our strategy is to establish the in-principle matters through legislation and to provide a solid foundation for the next step of our work. In the first half of next year, through introducing subsidiary legislation, we will make regulation for the technical details. In the following, I will explain the important points of the bill. First of all, the bill will set out principal matters to protect the safety and interests of passengers, including we will require the online platforms, vehicles and drivers to be licensed. Provision of online hailing services by any party will be liable to a criminal offense. For the platform, any electronic or telecommunication platforms providing such services have to be licensed. Licensees must be registered in Hong Kong and meet entry thresholds to ensure that they have the operational capacity for the services. The platforms must conduct due diligence on the vehicles and drivers. They must also monitor the quality of services of the drivers and submit records to the Bureau. For any breaches of operational conditions or license conditions, depending on the severity, the Transport Department may issue a fine, vary, suspend, or even revoke the license. Now, for vehicles providing online hailing services must be licensed and also must be covered by valid third-party risk insurance. On application and renewal of licenses, the vehicle must be under the age of 12 years. They must also comply with the relevant requirements to ensure safety. In operating online hail services, cars must display a mark of online hailing services, and also only drivers or only registered owners of the vehicles can operate the cars as online hailed cars. This will avoid vehicle permits being regarded as assets with speculative value and also illegal drivers. Now we will empower the Secretary for Transport to set out the upper limits of number of licenses for vehicles to control the number to avoid negative impacts due to overabundance of licenses. In the next step, we will give consideration to the actual situation in Hong Kong, including the traveling experience of passengers, actual needs, the ecosystem of public transport systems, and also our roads carrying capacity. Thirdly, regarding drivers, drivers will need to have driving permits to provide services. They also need to comply with relevant conditions and have passed examinations. To facilitate more young people to join the point-to-point transport industry, and also to facilitate taxi drivers to provide such services, taxi drivers and online hail car drivers will be subject to the same examination. And also, we have just completed a review on the taxi written examination. In November this year, we will implement the enhanced model. Now, there will be questions in relation to the taxi drivers' offense point system. We will also significantly simplify questions in relation to routes and locations to keep the examination for taxi drivers up to date and meet the industry's needs. I believe this will be able to rise up to the aspirations of the taxi industry for many years. Drivers who would like to join the online hail car industry can also get a taxi driver's license by completing the examination. We will issue a press release later on today concerning the details. Now, for existing drivers with a taxi driving permit, they do not need to take another examination to provide online hail car services. This will help us address the issue of shortage of drivers and also the aging situation of the industry and supports the growth of the point-to-point transport industry. Requiring platforms, vehicles, and drivers to be licensed will greatly enhance protection for passengers taking trips. But we can't rule out some lawbreakers who continue to offer illegal hiring services. Now we will create an offense which will render the lawbreaker liable for imprisonment and financial penalty. And also, we will also strengthen vehicle impoundments and temporary suspension of vehicle license. Now, even when the drivers in question cannot be identified, there will still be a mechanism to impound the vehicle in question. Now, technical details are involved. We are now formulating the details and drafting the relevant subsidiary legislation. Chairman, by introducing the regulatory regime for online ride-hailing services, we would like to benefit both the trade and passengers. As I've mentioned on numerous occasions, taxis and online ride-hailing services are not a zero-sum game. They have their distinct strengths and are complementary in nature. The inherent advantages of the taxi industry will not change after the regulatory regime is implemented, while online ride-hailing services can also unleash idle capacity of private vehicles through online hailing. Now, with this bill, we want to take the first step of establishing the regulatory regime. My team will cooperate fully with the Bills Committee and answer members' questions. I expect some questions to be related to the drafting matter of the bill and some questions in relation to the implementation details in the future. We will listen carefully to all these questions and answer them carefully so as to strive for early passage of the bill. Thank you, Secretary. These are the members: Mr. Martin Liao, Stanley Lee, Chen Hock-Fong, Frankie Yik, Adrian Ho, Ben Chan, Chen Xiu-Hong, Chao Xiu-Chung, Reverend Kuhn, Mr. Chen Pui-Leung, Andrew Lam, Michael Tian, and Ms. Doreen Kong. 13 members. I will give each member 5 minutes, but please remember this includes the answers as well. I will stop you once the time has expired. So please be succinct and give the Secretary some time to answer your questions. There is always a second round. Mr. Martin Liao. Thank you, Chairman. For a very long time, the operational situation of the taxi industry has been chaotic. Despite numerous chances and opportunities given by the government, these problems still remain. This is unacceptable. So we must have this bill to weed out the black sheep and establish a good image for the trade while increasing the options for passengers. In the mainland and also in overseas countries, there are very successful systems for online ride-hailing services. Those models will be our examples. I support the government in establishing a consensus on regulation of online ride-hailing services and then make regulations to sort out the technical details. Now, concerning the number of permits to be issued for vehicles, that's the main concern. In some overseas countries, the platform would provide vehicles to the drivers, and the drivers would rent the vehicle on a monthly basis. Now, will the government invite similar platforms to operate in Hong Kong? If so, concerning this type of platform, what will be the government's considerations? Thank you, Mr. Martin Liao. Now, in the past, there has been a lot of discussion on the quality of service provided by the point-to-point service industry, including taxi. There is keen aspiration to introduce competition to enhance the quality of service. Now, with this bill, the taxi industry can maintain its advantages, while competition will also be introduced. With competition, I believe that it will give rise to an increase in the level of services. Now, concerning different operational models of platforms, indeed, there are different examples in different places. My team has paid visits to different places to study those operational models. Now, Hong Kong has a rather unique situation. We would like to take a sound third step. So in terms of the number of permits to be issued for vehicles, we need to balance various factors, including traveling experience of passengers, the ecosystem of public transport system, as well as the carrying capacity of roads. We would like to ensure that the income of taxi drivers and online ride-hailing services providers to increase as well. So now our plan is to tie the drivers with the vehicles. Drivers must be the owners of the vehicles. Now we are aware that some platforms offer different options. So after taking the first conservative step, when the system is running smoothly, then we will review the situation. Depending on the developments of the industry, we will introduce more advanced operational models into Hong Kong. We will keep an open mind. At this stage, we incline to be simple and tie the drivers with the vehicles they drive. Now, during the discussion with the platforms, I believe that the platforms will be able to provide adequate services based on our vision.
Mr. Stanley Lee. Thank you, Chairman. I thank the government, the Secretary, and her team for taking this very important step. I have some questions regarding the platforms, vehicles, and drivers. Now, on platforms, if we say look at mainland, apart from ride-hailing platforms, we also have aggregator platforms. How are we going to monitor this type of aggregator platforms? There's not much details of it in the paper. I'd like the administration to share with us their plan. Second, on the processing of data of platform, people are concerned about data security. So I wonder if the administration have any plan to regulate the storage of data. Will they have to submit the data that they have to the government? Do we have any requirements on the storage facilities? Third, on drivers. I agree that we should tie the drivers to the ride-hailing vehicles. Some drivers may try to lease their vehicles to someone else to provide ride-hailing services. How should we deal with such a situation? I've talked to mainland ride-hailing platforms. They said that for those drivers with bad records, they can only take new orders upon facial recognition. So I wonder if we have any plan or mechanism to regulate such behavior. Thank you. Secretary. On the point about platforms, in the bill, we're going to set out how we're going to regulate ride-hailing platforms. Any or all electronic or telecommunications platforms providing ride-hailing services must obtain a license that cover aggregator platforms and platforms that directly dispatch vehicles and drivers. By aggregator platforms, we mean those that process a large number of personal data in the course of providing ride-hailing services and collect service fee from their partner platforms. Our goal is to make sure that these ride-hailing platforms are safe, regardless of whether a platform is an aggregator one or one that directly dispatch vehicles and drivers. They process a large amount of personal data. As a result, we think that we should regulate these platforms. Simply put, we are regulating aggregator platforms. As we draft the subsidiary legislation, we're going to set out more details on how we're going to regulate the general platforms that directly dispatch vehicles and drivers and aggregator platforms. We're going to set out separate licensing conditions for these platforms. When we tie the drivers to the platform, or rather vehicles, we believe that we will be able then to make sure that the drivers are the registered owners of the vehicles and that facilitate our monitoring. We ask the platforms to do due diligence to make sure that both the license and the drivers are with permits. I know that some platforms are already asking the drivers to go through facial recognition when they accept orders. I think that's my answer to your second question. Now, on the collection, storage, provision of services, the relevant data need to be kept and processed by the platforms. When necessary, the Transport Department, as the monitoring authority, will be empowered to ask the platforms to submit the relevant records. Mr. Chen Haofeng. Thank you. Much vested interest is involved in this bill, so I appreciate the government for taking this step forward. I'm glad that the government has taken on board my suggestions on the upper limit of the years of age of vehicles. I think that 12 years is acceptable. On the point about leasing, I'm also glad that the administration has accepted our suggestion on tying the drivers to the vehicles so that the permits will not become assets with speculative value. When we tie the driver to the vehicle, then the question of third-party risk insurance will arise. Because when that's the case, the premium of the policy will be higher. I wonder if we can have the insurance policy companies charge their purchasers that are the drivers by orders. I think that the administration should focus on regulating the platforms because they are the ones that dispatch orders. I think that we should rely on the platforms to regulate vehicles and drivers while the government monitor the platforms. I know that there will be an upper limit in terms of the number of ride-hailing vehicles. Are we going to limit the number of platforms or the number of vehicles? But I think that we should limit the number of ride-hailing vehicles under each platform instead. If we control the overall number of ride-hailing vehicles, then we may have too many cars during non-rush hours and too few vehicles during rush hours. I will press for a second round. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chen. On the 8th of July, during the panel on transport meeting, we shared with you our ideas. You were one of the members who asked us to look into how we can prevent permits from being or becoming assets of speculation. We've listened to the views from the platforms and the community. We proposed this bill to allow idle capacity to be released by having drivers drive their own vehicles under this sharing economy model. That's why we're going to set an upper limit on the ride-hailing vehicles. Now, on the point about a vehicle age, thank you for your support. You also talked about insurance. We do have an expert. Perhaps Mr. Chan Pui-Lan can share with us his views. We ask a third-party risk insurance to be taken out for ride-hailing vehicles. We have not specified in detail whether the drivers or the ride-hailing platform should be the one to take out the insurance. We're going to continue to communicate with the insurance authority to make sure that third-party risk insurance is taken out for ride-hailing vehicles, and we hope that there will be dedicated insurance products for ride-hailing service. We also will make sure that the premium will not be too high. Mr. Frankie Yik. Thank you. I have a dozen of questions. I may have to press 3 to 4 times. My first question. Well, it is said in the paper that the current daily patronage for point-to-point transport service is about 880,000 passengers, with ride-hailing vehicles accounting for 190,000 passengers. How did you come up with such figures? How accurate are they? Second, it's difficult for people to hail a taxi during rush hours. That's only normal. This happens all around the world. If during rush hours people have no problem hailing a taxi, it means that our economy is in trouble. It is said that about 6.8% of people use, 68% of people use taxis and 20% use ride-hailing service. In other words, 1.32% of the people use ride-hailing services. Should we issue a large number of permits for vehicles to exacerbate our traffic congestion to cater to these 1.32% of people? To cater to the needs of point-to-point transport services of the people, we're going to give out licenses. I think that we should restrict the number of hours that ride-hailing vehicles can operate. During small hours, taxi drivers have difficulty getting passengers. If we introduce new competition, then their income would be even lower. Secretary, thank you. On your first question, regarding the figures that we've set out in the paper, the Transport Department engaged a consultant to conduct a demand survey from 2024 to 2025. The scope of survey covers different locations. We have conducted on-site investigations. We also consulted drivers and passengers. That's how we came up with the figures. The first ride-hailing platform's been here for some 11 years. The demand survey shows that although there are quite a number of people who use ride-hailing platform services, many of them actually hail taxis. Taxis have their own competitive edge. They're able to accept street hailing. So as a result, we found that number of passengers for taxis is about 690,000. that for ride-hailing vehicles account for 190,000 passengers. For mainland cities and overseas countries that introduce that ride-hailing services, they have not set a limit on the number of vehicles. Over the past few months, we've been trying to explain to the community the uniqueness of our city. Most people use public transport to travel, and this accounts for nearly 90% of daily passenger trips. As our city is densely populated, we need to set an upper limit on the number of vehicles. At the same time, we need to also enhance the experience of the members of the public in using ride-hailing services. We will continue to listen to the views from the public and stakeholders when we formulate more details. Here we're trying to set out the framework first.
Before the next member speaks, I remind members, if you have direct or indirect pecuniary interest concerning the matter at hand today, please declare your interest before you speak. Mr. Adrian Ho, I thank the Secretary for her clear explanation. I support the bill. I have several questions concerning companies operating online hailing platforms. We need to ensure that those companies can operate smoothly in Hong Kong. Now, there is a requirement that the company must have a registered company in Hong Kong in order to operate the platform. Can I have more information about that? Will the company be required to hire a certain percentage of local employees? And also, there are questions like profits, revenue, and salaries record at hand. So will these companies be required to engage Hong Kong companies or Hong Kong accountants to compile financial statements? At present, some overseas companies operating in Hong Kong issue salaries through overseas companies. So will these platform companies be required to disperse salaries by a Hong Kong company? Now, there has been some concerns about the health of old age drivers. So will the platforms be required to comply with regulations on age of drivers? Now, I support the idea of tying the drivers to their cars. But besides the registered owners, some cars will be driven by other persons, like spouses. So in the future, will direct relatives of the registered owners be allowed to drive their cars for a living? Secretary, thank you. Concerning the platforms, we have set out several requirements. For example, the company must be registered locally in Hong Kong. They need to get a business registration. This is something that we value highly because it shows the determination of the company and the team to establish a presence in Hong Kong. This will also facilitate our monitoring. And there are other factors. For example, in the bill, we have provided for the power of the Secretary and the considerations to be taken in terms of permit issuance. That includes the experience of operating online hailing platforms locally or overseas, the financial viability of the company, the investments the company is going to make in Hong Kong, the qualification of the board members, and so on. So in the principal ordinance, we will set out the major considerations the Secretary will take in issuing a platform permit. In the future, with subsidiary legislation, we will set out the details. There will also be licensing conditions. So I look forward to taking members' views on how we can achieve sufficient oversight without deterring potential platforms to come to Hong Kong. Now, in terms of tying the driver with the car, I thank Mr. Adrian Ho for your support. We have taken due consideration behind this requirement. Now, there are cases where the registered owner is not the driver of the car themselves. Now, the policy intent is to free up the idling capacity of private cars. But if we relax the requirements, it will give rise to more potential problems, and it would be more difficult in terms of insurance coverage. So in order to implement the regulatory regime as soon as possible, we incline to tie the drivers to the car, and only the registered owner of the vehicle can operate online hailing services. Mr. Ben Chen, I support setting an upper limit of permits to be issued. Now we need to think about how we will get the ball rolling. I think initially we need to be safe and conservative. We should issue a small number of permits, for example, 1,000, and then we need to conduct study on market operation and also the demand for the services and also the operational situation in the market and progress gradually. We shouldn't issue too many licenses. Otherwise, there will be too many online hail cars running on the street, and it will give rise to social issues. So my question is, under the new regime, both the platform, vehicle and driver have to get a license. Now for the platform, the government will monitor the operation of the platform. But how can you enforce the law on the vehicles and drivers? Some worried how you can identify that the car and the driver are licensed. Of course, the driver needs a driving license or a permit. But for the private car, there is no way to tell whether the private car is being used for personal purpose or offered for hire. So I understand the government will continue to conduct sting operation, but are there any other methods? Second, after getting a vehicle permit, since this is a valuable public resource, there is a limit to the number of permits. If a driver applies for a permit, but in fact he is not offering online hailing services, that will become a zombie license. So how can the government prevent such a situation? It will give rise to a shortage of service, and then there will be call for issuance of more permits. So how can the government ensure that licensees are indeed offering services? Secretary, thank you, Mr. Ben Chen. Now I thank you for your support concerning the upper limit of permits. So today we are focusing on the principal framework of the regulatory regime. Concerning the number of permits to be issued, we will engage the trade as a next step, it is too early to say what the optimal number should be. Back in July, at the meeting of the panel on transport, some members raised a similar question, and we have conducted some researches afterwards. On the last occasion, the Permanent Secretary also promised to conduct a study. So in the draft bill, it is clearly stipulated that the vehicles will have to display its online hailing permits at an appropriate positions on the car as required by the Secretary. We have spelled that out clearly in the principal ordinance concerning the format of the sign and also the positions on the vehicle and also the punishment for non-compliance. Those will be for the next stage in the subsidiary legislation. So in short, these requirements will be put in place. There are clear and steep punishments for any non-compliance to prevent illegal offering of services. Now concerning another question raised by Mr. Ban Chan. If the licensees are often offline, if they very rarely engage in the business, I think we need to consult the trade on how we can get the data and monitor the situation. Mr. Chen Siu-Hong, thank you, Chairman. I've mentioned on various occasions that with technological advancement, online hailing service has a very strong demand. So after many years of deliberation, finally we saw the light at the end of the tunnel. As the Secretary has mentioned on various occasions, the consideration or the policy intent shouldn't be introducing or copying the framework of other places blindly without considering our actual situation, because that would hurt the interests of both the trade and the passengers. So the Secretary has been talking about a complementary relationship between the taxi industry and the online hailing services. Now, I support all the regulations about permits, tying the drivers to the vehicles and so on. In the past, many stakeholders have approached the government and legislative members. There have been diverging views on various requirements. For example, the age of the vehicles. Now, the upper limits of the age of the vehicle has been raised from 7 years to 12 years. Many stakeholders supported it. However, for those who think 7 years were too much, 12 years would be unpalatable for them. They think the upper limit should be 3 years. Now, for taxi drivers who newly entered the trade, this will be a serious problem for them. So how can you be sure that in the future, taxi fleets, ordinary taxi drivers, hire vehicles and online hire vehicles can operate in harmony together? I believe the Secretary would not like to disturb the delicate balance. Now I would like to follow up on Mr. Frankie Yick's question. Well, taxi, I think the Secretary has mentioned that taxis would be playing a major role in point-to-point transport, while online hailing cars play a supplementary role. But it seems that the Secretary has been talking about that less. So is that still the government's position? Is competitive or healthy competitiveness is still the way forward?
議員提真係比較
Secretary, I thank Mr. Chen for giving us his several comments from a macro perspective. As we roll out this regulatory framework, we adopt a multi-pronged approach to regulate ride-hailing services. In Hong Kong, ride-hailing service is a brand new mode of public transport services. Although it's been existing in other places for a long period of time, this is new for us, and we think that the framework that we present today is much more stringent than other places. We believe that the income and the business model of taxi trade will be clearer and higher when we regulate ride-hailing services. We believe that there will be healthy competition between taxi trade and the ride-hailing platforms. The government is not just the facilitator of public transport, but also the regulator. We want to promote competition between ride-hailing vehicles and taxis so that there will be more options available for the members of the public. We want to address the diversified point-to-point transport services needs of the people. Thank you. Mr. Chao Shu-chong. Thank you, Chairman. I support the regulation of ride-hailing services, and I agree with the proposed framework. I have a few questions. First, on the number of vehicle permits to be issued. The principal ordinance does not cover the number of permits to be issued and how the application should be filed. Since this proposal has been published, there are full-time ride-hailing drivers who told me that they may not be able to get hold of a permit, and that seriously affect their livelihood. So how are we going to issue permits? Would it be done on a first-come, first-served basis, or are we going to do a lottery? For full-time ride-hailing drivers with stable performance, will they be accorded priority? For drivers who may not drive that often, they may also try to fight for a permit, just in case they want to work as a ride-hailing drivers. The government said that ride-hailing vehicles will be treated as another type of public transport. Under the Road Traffic Public Service Ordinance, all drivers will be regulated. I wonder if the ride-hailing drivers will be also regulated under the same ordinance. For taxi drivers, they are subject to the taxi driver offense point system. If they don't take the most direct route, they will be penalized. But for ride-hailing drivers, they are not subject to the same penalty. How are you going to make sure that the platforms will address this type of issue among ride-hailing drivers fairly? Secretary, thank you for the question. Under the principal ordinance, it is said that the Commissioner for Transport can, by notice published in the Gazette, set the number of permits to be issued. The Commissioner for Transport will also be empowered to assign the permits. These are the principles set out in the principal ordinance. As to how we're going to issue the permits, we're still looking into it. We will try to do it in a fair manner. Mr. Chow said that there are already drivers using their own vehicles to carry passengers for hire or reward. We treasure both taxi drivers and ride-hailing drivers because we want to increase the number of drivers to provide point-to-point personalized transport services. We want more young drivers who are well-versed in technology. We will continue to talk to the LegCo members and Association of Drivers when we formulate further details. We will listen to them on their views and their requests. We treat everyone equally. We've simplified the written test for taxi drivers in response to the demand from the taxi trade. Under the bill, we are going to set requirements for applicants of driver's permit. They should not have any serious traffic contraventions in the past 5 years before they file the application, for example. But as ride-hailing drivers will use online platforms, they have to take the suggested route. That's different from the taxi trade. That's why we're going to rely on the platform for monitoring. Thank you. Reverend Peter Kuhn. Thank you. Over the past number of years, many people ask for a regulation and legalization of ride-hailing services in Hong Kong. Hong Kong as an international travel destination, if we don't have ride-hailing services, then we will lag behind other countries. When we visit other places, we know that many places already offer ride-hailing services. When tourists come, they don't know what platforms we offer. I have a concern. I don't think that legalizing ride-hailing services will undermine the taxi trade business. I don't think that this is a zero-sum game. The regulatory framework. Complaints can be filed by passengers to the platforms, and sometimes they can receive refund. That's good for consumers. For luxury hire cars, they are not considered ride-hailing vehicles. When tourists come to Hong Kong, they have different needs. They may not know how to hire vehicles. For luxury hire cars, 7-seater vehicles, maybe we should include them under the regulatory framework. This type of service is offered by many different companies, say for example hotels. I think that we have to make things convenient for visitors and tourists. If we can offer more options under the same platform, they will find Hong Kong more appealing. Thank you. Secretary. Thank you for your suggestion. When we talk about local point-to-point transport services, we often focus on the needs of locals. Hong Kong is an international metropolis and a popular tourist destination. There are 3 benefits to ride-hailing services that allow tourists to overcome language barrier. Second, because booking service is available, tourists will be more certain about their journey and fares. Third, in some places, there are platforms that have established for themselves a brand. If we can invite these brands to Hong Kong, then tourists may be more familiar with them. And this also shows how internationalized we are. Under this regulatory framework, we target ride-hailing vehicles. Under road traffic ordinances, we have legislation regulating hire cars that are offered by hotels and cross-boundary vehicles. These are 2 sets of framework. In the future, ride-hailing platforms can invite these hire cars to offer services on their own platforms. We also welcome ride-hailing platforms offering taxi as an option for their passengers. This is how we can cater to the needs of different people. On regulation and data. If hire cars is listed as an option on the platforms, we hope that the platforms will also keep records of the operation. Thank you.
Mr. Chen Pui-Leung, thank you, Chairman. Before I ask my question, I declare interest. The company or the organization I'm serving in also provides insurance services for vehicles. Now, concerning the issue of online car hailing services, it's not something new. We are just adding another category of permits to allow vehicles to offer car hiring services. So the insurance industry has discussed how we can offer a suitable insurance package to online hail car drivers. Now, under the existing insurance policy for vehicles, if a driver has obtained a license for online car hiring services, we can simply extend the coverage of the existing insurance policy. But how can we arrive at a reasonable and accurate policy premium? The insurance industry needs to have sufficient data to do the calculation. So after the regulatory regime is implemented, can the government ask the platform to make available data to insurance companies, for example, the mileage of vehicles and so on? That will help the insurance industry in arriving at a more reasonable premium level. That's our consensus. And also the insurance industry supports the idea of requiring drivers to drive their own car, because that would make the drivers much more careful in their business, and that would reduce the accident rates. Now, because of time, I will save my questions for another time. For example, the liability issues. Now, my second question, this bill, does it cover the existing online hailing platform for taxi services? And about the service quality of online hail cars, will there be a unified standard? There may be several platforms in the future. Now, a driver may be disqualified or terminated by a platform because of poor service. But if there is not a universal standard or notification system, then the driver may register under a new platform to continue his service. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chan. Mr. Chan Siu-Hung is an insurance expert, so I thank you for your questions and opinions. Insurance coverage is a necessary requirement for vehicles and drivers providing online hail car services. Vehicle owners who are interested in joining the industry will have to take additional insurance policy to cover their services. So that's a major concern for them. We will keep closely communicating with the insurance industry. Now, Mr. Chan Siu-Hung, Mr. Chen Pui-Leung mentioned that maybe we can do this through extending the existing insurance policies for private cars. So we will keep studying the possibility of that. In terms of sharing platform data like mileage and the demand, under our bill, we will require platforms to keep record of the operational data. Now, in the future, we will convey the message of the insurance industry to the platforms. I think we can strive for sharing of data by platforms with a concerted effort. Now, sometimes drivers do not work on a full-time basis. They provide a part-time services. So making available data would help gauging the service level. Now, concerning the characteristics or special services provided by different platforms, that will be allowed. Mr. Andrew Lam. Now, illegal provision of online hailing service has been existing in the markets for a very long time. That proves that there has been a long-standing demand for these services. So I support regulating the industry. However, regulation alone is not enough. We need steering as well. As mentioned by the Secretary, we need to consider the government's overall transport policy. So rather than views, I would say this is my hope. Now, drawing on the experience of taxi fleets, Whether or not you tie the drivers with the vehicles, when we seek to regulate a new market, the discussion would be moot if there are no new drivers entering the market. Now, there are only 46,000 active taxi drivers, despite the sheer number of taxi licenses available. Now, I know the online hail ride services will not completely overlap with the taxi industry, but there will be some overlapping. So I think the government cannot give a free rein to the market in terms of monopoly of data and also financial incentives. I understand that if the entry threshold is too high, no one will enter the trade. But if the threshold is too low, there will be zombie licenses, as mentioned by other members. Now, my second hope. I know we are focusing on online hail car services provided in Hong Kong, but we are pushing for integration with the mainland. I hope that the framework will be wide enough to cover cross-boundary hail car services in the future. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Andrew Lam. Concerning the supply of drivers, we would like to see more drivers, whether they are taxi drivers or online hail car drivers. We hope more drivers will take the examinations and get a permit. We want to attract more new blood into the industry as well. So we won't set a limit on the number of permits for drivers issued. We will also implement the simplified taxi driver written test to attract more drivers to enter the industry. Now, in the future, for drivers with a license, they need not be pegged with a particular platform. They can choose the platform they prefer. In that case, we can prevent a certain platform from monopolizing the carrying capacity of point-to-point transport services in Hong Kong. Now, we agree that we need a universal standard. So if a driver is not up to standard, how can the information be conveyed to other platforms? But we will think about that. Now, concerning private car point-to-point services provided by online hail ride platforms, they are limited to services locally. However, there are existing cross-boundary hire car companies. In the future, platforms can include these cross-boundary hire car service providers in the business. Now, we want to keep the two regulatory frameworks separated to avoid confusion. Regulation of online hail car service is a new thing. We want to take it step by step. Mr. Michael Tian. Chairman, back in 2016, I raised this idea first. So I'm pleased to see this coming to fruition. So I thank the government for that. Now, the major change compared with the previous proposal is that drivers will now be tied to their own cars. This is the only thing that I opposed. I think to unleash the idling capacity, we have to remove this requirement. I've asked the trade. They think that this is too stringent and that will mean underutilization of the private car carrying capacity. Now, usually the vehicle will be owned by the father of the household, and sometimes the father or the child of the family would use the car to earn an extra buck. Now, with these requirements in place, that is no longer allowed. Now, for taxis, if the insurance policy is extended, then more drivers can be covered. I think we can do the same for online hail car platforms. Now, for online hailing platforms, they would like to prevent drivers sharing the same car because that would give rise to issues like facial recognition and profits sharing. Now, I'm one for concession, so let me throw this idea around. Now, can we have a requirement or can we set a limit for the maximum number of family members to use the car to provide services at different time period? Now, on renewal, the vehicle owner needs to update the number of drivers driving the vehicles. It's easy to prevent foul play because facial recognition is very accurate. When the drivers are on duty, there would be a facial recognition requirements. The passengers can easily see the photographs of the drivers and verify the identity of the drivers. Now, if the driver's attitude or service quality is low, the license would be revoked on renewal, so no drivers would dare offer substandard service. So if there are 5 drivers registered to one vehicle, I don't see why that's a problem because the behavior or the service quality of each of the driver would affect the renewal of license. If every one of them is offering good service, we shouldn't intervene on the number of drivers sharing the same car. Now let me share my research with you. I've asked around. Now many passengers find it difficult to find a ride in the small hours of the night because if only the vehicle owner can drive the vehicle and provide the service, there will be insufficient supply. Now, when you have set an upper limit for vehicle license to be issued, I think you need to make the full use of each car because it may give rise to insufficient supply of drivers. If you tie the drivers to the vehicles, then there may be insufficient supply during several periods of the day.
Secretary, you only have a few dozen seconds to reply. Just answer if the administration will consider my proposal. Thank you, Chairman. I'll just take a few seconds to answer it. I agree with what Mr. Tian said. We want to make it convenient for people to secure a vehicle. That's why we'll be careful in determining the number of permits to be issued. However, given your suggestions, there will be multiple problems that may arise in relation to regulation, in relation to how the drivers will split their check. We have to strike a balance. We have to also make it appealing for potential entrants. Well, in the interest of time, we will talk to Mr. Tian further in the future. Ms. Doreen Kong. Thank you, Chairman. I'm glad that the administration is responding to people's demand for point-to-point transport services so that there will be healthy competition in the transport trade. This is a great thing for the people. Now we are establishing a framework first, and then we are going to formulate the details by drafting a piece of subsidiary legislation. There are multiple aspects involved in the ride-hailing services. We have to strike a balance. We need to cater to the interest of different stakeholders. Say, for example, in Singapore, they also establish a framework first before they formulate the details. I'd like to ask about the relationship between platforms and drivers. In some other jurisdictions, there are often litigations. There are three options. Either the drivers are the employees, or they are self-employed, or they belong to a special category. In some places, it's called workers. So what is the relationship between the drivers and the platforms under our regulatory framework? Do they have an employment regulation? Because carriers' liability will only be involved when there is an employment relationship between the platforms and the drivers. Second, on the relationship between the platforms and the passengers. A few years ago, there are a few case laws in the UK where traffic accidents were involved and passengers seek compensation from the ride-hailing platforms. According to their higher court, it is said that the platforms is not only the middleman. So under the administration's proposed regulatory framework, what is the relationship between the platforms and the passengers? How can we be protected in case of traffic accidents? Secretary, I thank Ms. Kong for her support and her comments. I'd like to talk to Ms. Kong after the meeting, and I hope that she will share with us some case laws in other countries so that we can make sure that the government as the regulator and platform as the provider will be able to duly protect the safety of our people. So these case laws are very important to us. I will answer a few of the questions. First, Ms. Khan asked about the relationship between the platforms and the drivers. We do not propose to change the status quo. In other words, we are not introducing an employment relationship. We want to leave this blank, and we don't want to overcomplicate things. Through regulating the platforms, agreements will be covered. We will be result-oriented. In the contract and agreement between the platforms and drivers, interests and obligations are going to be set out in detail. Regarding the relationship between the passengers and the platforms, details will be set out in the contract and in the subsidiary legislation. There are many things that we can learn from other places. There are two principles set out in the principal ordinance. There are two types of service that the platform should offer. First of all, the platforms should accept orders from users. And second, the platforms will serve as a connector between the passengers and the vehicles. We are going to set out the definition of these terms in the bill. I hope that I've addressed the concerns of Mr. Lee Chen-kun. Thank you. Well, I think that this framework is great for users of ride-hailing services. In the future, they can choose among hire cars, ride-hailing vehicles, and taxis to reach their destination. Now we want to make the platforms more convenient for members of the public so that they can choose the best type of transport for them. Are we going to have an aggregator platforms? Because if we have, then people will know more about, say, the fares, the types of vehicles available. By this, people will know how much, say, a 7-seater vehicle would cost and how much a 4-seater vehicle would cost. I think that we should ask the platforms to provide feedback to the administration so that we know how many ride-hailing vehicles there are in operation on a daily basis. The rush hours is usually when people go to work or when people return from their trips in other countries during holidays. I hope that the administration will make use of artificial intelligence and big data to solve these problems. Second, ride-hailing drivers are mostly self-employed. How should they file their taxes? I don't see this in the paper. Third, even if this piece of bill is passed, the framework is not fully established. Currently, ride-hailing vehicles are white license or white plate cars. And this, well, before the legal framework is established, how are we going to deal with the taxis, or rather vehicles that carry passengers for hire or reward illegally? There are different penalties and fines set out in the proposed framework. I wonder if the court in the future will just hand down fines of $1,000 to $2,000. Will the court hand down prison terms? And who will be held liable if the platforms is prosecuted and convicted? Will the frontline officers be jailed, or will the directors be jailed? What happens if the platforms refuse to identify the drivers who contravene the offenses? Secretary, thank you. I think that you're referring to some larger platforms, which are aggregator platforms. Under this bill, we're going to incorporate different types of platform. We want to provide convenience for the members of the public. There are many aggregator platforms on the mainland. On the mainland, there are over 10 general platforms. That's why they also have aggregator platform to consolidate all these options. We have been in touch with some aggregator platforms. We keep an open mind. We don't mind these platforms joining our regime. Second, There will be subsidiary legislation supporting the regulatory framework. This will facilitate the operation of the ordinance. However, before the framework is established, we will not tolerate illegal carriage of passengers for reward. The police is taking enforcement action. Over the past 6 months, we see the police taking stringent enforcement action. We have taken action against 80 vehicles that carry passengers for reward. For illegal drivers or illegal vehicles, the penalty against the platforms can be as high as $1 million and 12 months of imprisonment. And the directors or the person in charge of the platforms will be held criminally liable. Mr. Lee, if you have any more questions, please press this button for the second round. Mr. Gary Chang, thank you. I'm surprised that we are having this Bills Committee meeting today. During the panel on transport meeting, the administration said that they have to conduct more research and survey. At that time, I thought that it would be impossible for us to have this bill passed within this term of the LegCo. So I appreciate the efforts of the government. I think that we have to set out clear definitions. What are the roles of the ride-hailing vehicles? For example, now in terms of policy direction, I think that the government has set out very clearly the distinctive roles of taxis and ride-hailing vehicles. They complement each other. Ride-hailing vehicles are to unleash idle capacity under the sharing economy model. I agree that we should tie the drivers to the ride-hailing vehicles. This will ensure the quality of service provided by the drivers, as well as safeguarding the safety of the people. This is also how we distinguish between taxis and ride-hailing vehicles. Because ride-hailing vehicles cannot be leased out for 24 hours a day, unlike taxis. If the ride-hailing vehicles can be leased, then the licensing conditions should be more stringent. However, if we tie the drivers to the vehicles, I think that we can issue more permits, because the vehicles will not be operating for 24 hours a day. I think that also we have to have regards to the experience of passengers. Are you going to have any requirements on, say, the time needed for a vehicles to arrive at where the passengers were and the percentage of journeys completed? My fourth question on the obligations of platforms. There are some things that the platforms cannot do under the regulatory framework. I'm worried that some aggregator platforms will pass on their obligations to some middlemen or agents. They may claim that they are unaware of certain illegal behavior. As far as I understand, the platforms will be held liable mainly. That's my second question. Third, on the number of vehicle permits to be issued that's going to be set out in the subsidiary legislation. Is there any flexibility? Are you going to accept diverse mode of, say, fare charging? Thank you.
長
係
Secretary, thank you, Mr. Zhang, for your questions. I think the determination of the platform company is very important. And secondly, we will progress with the regulatory regime according to the consensus in society. So that's why we will rely on this consensus as a driving force of our work. Concerning your questions, in the bill, we will empower the Secretary to make regulations concerning the quality of service to the satisfaction of the Secretary. So we will study potential service targets that you suggested. In setting a target, we need to give consideration to the operability. Now, usually, existing platform companies have data collected from overseas, so we will give consideration to those data. So we have set clear requirements on due diligence conducted by platforms, including aggregator platforms. So in the law, we will set out requirements for the companies to demonstrate that they have given their best efforts to conduct due diligence. If so, there will be defenses for the platforms. And also the licensing conditions for different kinds of platforms will be different. So these licensing terms will be catered to the operational model of the platforms so that they can't delegate or pass on their liabilities. Mr. Lai Tong Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. I think this is a memorable moment. I agree with the government's approach to introduce the principal ordinance and then set out the technical details in supplementary or subsidiary legislation. Now, this bill outright specifies that cost is not the only consideration. So after the implementation of this regime, enforcement will need to keep up. You may even need to step up enforcement efforts on unlicensed vehicles for hire to crack down hard on the situation. So will the Secretary consider this factor as well? Second, as mentioned by Ms. Doreen Kong, as mentioned by the Secretary, the majority of the details will be set out by way of subsidiary legislation in the next stage. Now, from my understanding, these regulations will go through negative vetting. So once you publish the subsidiary legislation on the Gazette, they will come into effect immediately. But I believe these regulations will be very complicated. So we can't rule out that some members may ask the government to amend the subsidiary legislation at a later stage of the negative vetting process. So if these regulations have already been published on the Gazette, when you make amendments, the rules will change, and some stakeholders may be caught off guard. So may I suggest, after publishing the notice on the Gazette, the rules should come into effect at a later date. So since the rules will be very complicated, I don't think that they should take effect immediately after publication on the Gazette. And thirdly, as mentioned by Mr. Gary Zhang, I think it is Mr. Gary Zhang, paragraphs 22 and 23, impoundment of vehicles and temporary suspension of vehicle license. So after reading the paper, I gather that under existing legislation, if the vehicle owners refuse to disclose the identity of the driver, then the government cannot prosecute the driver, and you cannot impound the vehicle and revoke the vehicle license. Now, I understand that you will propose a committee stage amendments under this bill to plug the loophole. So will you take this opportunity to plug the loophole in the other ordinance as well? Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Lai. I have been listening carefully to all your questions because all your questions are pertinent. Now, about the fees charged, you are right. Our policy intent is to provide more flexibility to the fee structure. Now, we saw in some overseas places that the fees charged by the platform or the licensing fees charged by the government on the platform would vary depending on the number of trips and the length of the journey. But we are not there yet. We just want to provide sufficient room for maneuver in the principal ordinance. When we flesh out the bill by way of subsidiary legislation, yes, the process will be one of negative vetting, and we don't know how thick the subsidiary legislation will be. But as we have mentioned, we will strive to introduce the subsidiary legislation into LegCo by the first half of next year. In setting a date for commencement, we will listen to members' views. Only after due discussion with the Legislative Council will we formulate the details concerning the licensing conditions. So we have already set aside time for this process. Now we think it will only be in the third quarter of next year when we will earnestly receive application. So we have half a year's time to discuss the details. Now concerning the impoundments and the last question, we will answer the question at a later stage. Mr. Michael Look. Chairman, I support the introduction of this bill. This aligned with the proposal made by the FTU about a year ago. They are actually very similar. That includes the issuance of permits to platform, regulation, due diligence, and also the upper limit of vehicle permits, and also requirements on the part of drivers, especially tying the driver to vehicles, and also the upper limits to the number of vehicle permits. We welcome these. Sometimes the more is not merrier. President Xi has just published an important article on Qiuxi that the central government needs to address the issue of inflation head on. So sometimes number would lead to competition. Now, I remember several years ago, the services provided by online hail car drivers were very good. The drivers were very polite and they were all smiling. Now, recently, when I took a hail service in the mainland, the service quality has dropped. When I requested the driver to turn the AC up, he scolded me. So I think we can't have too many online hire car. So I support setting upper limits for vehicle permits. Now, with the new regulatory regime, there will be new relationship between the platform and the drivers. So there is a point I think the government should listen to our view. There should be a tripartite negotiation system. Now, those drivers working under a platform company are all individual drivers. They have no bargaining power. So in terms of profit sharing and other arrangements, there are lots of disputes. So some drivers may be unhappy about the working conditions. And even some drivers may take industrial actions, and that may lead to road blockages and congestion. So I think there should be a tripartite platform involving the government, the platforms, and the drivers to sort out all the operational details in the future. So will the government consider this suggestion? Secretary, thank you, Mr. Look, for your suggestion and questions. Now, the income of drivers are closely related to the traveling experience and the service quality and the quality of service they provide. So on one hand, we will limit the number of vehicle permits to be issued. On the other hand, we will tie the drivers to the vehicles. The drivers must be the vehicle owner. In that case, they will treat the car better and also provide better services. Now, previously, when we talk in an unofficial setting, Mr. Michael Look has also mentioned that we need a tripartite platform. I understand that Mr. Michael Look is coming from the interest of the drivers. Now, under the proposal, drivers can choose whatever platforms they prefer, and we will not set an upper limit for platforms in Hong Kong. We will allow the markets to adjust itself so that the best platform can recruit more drivers. We care about the benefits of drivers as well. So we welcome more opinions from Mr. Michael Look concerning a tripartite platform addressing the concerns of both the platform and the drivers. We will be pleased to study any suggestion.
經濟咧好容易到咗
Chairman, monopoly and hegemony will easily arise given the limited number of platforms. There are 7 members waiting to speak. Any objections if I extend the meeting by 15 minutes? Each member will have 5 minutes. Please observe the time limit. Mr. Chan Hao-feng. Thank you. I have 3 quick questions. A member asked about the employment relationship between the platforms and the drivers. This is the first time we regulate platform economy. If we don't set out clearly the relationship between the platforms and the drivers, that will affect other forms of platform economy, say, for example, food delivery platforms. Second, ride-hailing services will become a mode of public transport. For certain places, say for example boundary control points, they can only be entered by public transport. So can ride-hailing vehicles enter boundary control points? At Shenzhen Bay, there is a lay-by for ride-hailing vehicles. They were packed, fully packed. When ride-hailing vehicles arrive there, they can only leave when they have an order. So you have to think carefully about that. Third, I think that there should be markings. Some vehicles may not be in service. Sometimes a vehicle may be driven by the ride-hailing driver, sometimes it may be driven by his wife. How can we make sure that the vehicles is in service? How can the people tell? Secretary. Now, regarding your last question, we asked the vehicle to put up identification marking on vehicles. I think that the member is asking how we can make sure that people can tell if a vehicle is a ride-hailing vehicle and if they are in service. Second, on the point about employment relationship, I do agree that we have to be careful. Well, this is a legislative framework to regulate ride-hailing platforms and drivers. When ride-hailing vehicles are providing public transport service, we are tying the drivers to the vehicles but not the platforms. This is how we can better regulate the trade. Third, after a vehicle and a driver have obtained permit through the platforms, they will be considered public transport providers. But it does not mean that they will enjoy equal rights with other public transport providers. For franchised bus, taxis, and minibus, they enjoy different privileges and ordinances under their respective licensing conditions. I think that people want us to make it convenient for passengers to board and get off ride-hailing vehicles. For places with limited space, we may not allow ride-hailing vehicles to enter because we don't want to see traffic congestion. Now for taxis, the privileges and advantages that they are enjoying now will remain unchanged. The taxi stands and taxi laybys at boundary control points will not be changed. Read out the orders. We also have Mr. Adrian Ho, Ms. Doreen Kong, and Mr. Gary Chan waiting to speak. Mr. Frankie Yik. Thank you. The taxi trade has accepted the existence of ride-hailing vehicles. All they want is a fair playing ground. Now on fares. It is said that the administration have no plan to regulate the fares of ride-hailing vehicles. I'd like to talk to you about this idea of statutory fares. The fares to be charged by taxis is restricted by laws. There was a certain secretary said that taxi drivers should not be able to negotiate with their customers or passengers fares. How come ride-hailing platforms can offer different fares at different times to their passengers? There is a certain mainland ride-hailing platforms that have just entered Hong Kong. For a journey that should cost $80, they are only charging $20. Given this, who will take taxis? I believe that you are going to grant at least 3 platforms. And when that happens, these 3 platforms will try to lower their fares to attract a larger pool of customers. Taxi trade will suffer as a result. I think that the administration should regulate the fares to be charged by the ride-hailing platforms to protect the taxi trade. They should ask the platforms to charge a statutory fare. That's my first point. Second, on the age of vehicles. The number of taxi fleets, the number of taxis under taxi fleet is far lower than the intended 3,000. That's because we don't have enough drivers. Many of them have switched to driving ride-hailing vehicles. We all know that we don't have enough drivers. That's why we have a sector-specific labor importation scheme. The government said that given the regulatory framework, the ride-hailing drivers will switch to driving taxis. However, I think that this will exacerbate the insufficiency of drivers. How will the government meet their goals for taxi fleets? The government said that individuals who hold a taxi driving license may apply to the Transport Department for a driving permit without having to sit for an additional test or complete additional pre-service course. This is conducive to expanding employment options for taxi drivers. I'm worried about this. We want to encourage ride-hailing drivers to switch to driving taxis. The Secretary, you said that we have over 200,000 taxi drivers in Hong Kong, but there are only 40 to 50,000 active taxi drivers. When the taxi drivers are able to obtain driver's permit, then many of them will switch to driving ride-hailing vehicles. Because by driving ride-hailing vehicles, they don't have to pay rent to rent a taxi. The government said that they proposed this framework to provide quality point-to-point transport services, and they said that the requirement for ride-hailing service is higher. There is an age limit for vehicles of 12 years. They are subject to a rating system, so on and so forth. But I think that this is how the government is putting the cart before the horse. There are many idle taxis. The business and the room of survival of the taxi trade is limited by the ride-hailing service. The white plate licenses are illegal. Mr. Yik, I think you're going to press for the 4th or 5th round. Please only answer the question during the 3rd round, because this will be unfair for other members. Mr. Chan Xiuhong, 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Chairman. In other places, when they regulate ride-hailing service, they cover driverless cars. During the panel meeting, I said that the administration should cover autonomous driving in the regulatory framework. But after reading the bill, I found that the availability of a driver is presumed. I know that we're trialing autonomous driver in Lemma Island, but I think that in 1 to 2 years' time, we're going to roll out sandbox for driverless car or autonomous driving. I wonder if the administration is prepared for that. Second, the administration said that the government have taken a reference from the Australian example by charging fees from the platforms to support the taxi trade and improving the quality of service to promote the sustainable development of the trade and benefit the members of the public. The secretary said that they are going to set out how the platforms are going to be charged and if they will be charged on in terms of the number of journeys they offer. I wonder if the administration is still thinking of trying to subsidize the taxi trade and improving the service. Secretary, thank you. Now, autonomous driving technology is developing in leaps and bounds. In 2024, we amended the relevant legislation to support its development. In the ordinance, we empowered the Commissioner for Transport to, through administrative means, exempt driverless vehicles from the rules and regulations under road traffic ordinances. I do think that we need a comprehensive and stringent set of regulations for both platforms and vehicles. When we see autonomous driving becoming popular in Hong Kong, we believe that under the road traffic autonomous driving ordinance, we will be able to, through administrative means, provide for exemptions to facilitate its development. I do think that we do have room to cater to such a possibility. Second, we've looked at the Australian example. They charge fees from platforms to establish fund to support the development of the taxi trade. We have not included the idea of a dedicated fund under the bill. But when necessary, we're going to deploy resources to support the development of point-to-point transport services and taxi service. We don't want to make our provisions too complicated. Thank you.
主席，咁
Mr. Ben Chen. Thank you, Chairman. Currently, the services offered by online hail car platform includes booking a ride online. Now in the bill, you mentioned that any telecommunication platform offering similar services would also be covered. Now say renting a limousine, a user can book a limousine through making a call or through online booking. But that is a kind of unlicensed offering of hire car service. So how do you define that? Where do you draw the line? Now, if an online hailing service vehicle has obtained a permit, can the car still be used for other personal businesses? For example, can a client make a direct booking with the driver through direct communication? Would that be in breach of the law? So that's a vehicle with a permit to offer online hail service, but the passenger books the service directly with the driver. So how do you enforce the law? Thirdly, the operational models of a traditional online platform and an aggregator platform are very different. So there should be different regulatory requirements on them. So what's the government's position on this? And also, if a private car has a license both in Hong Kong and in the mainland, can the vehicle obtain a permit? So will it be in breach of the law if the driver takes the passengers across the border? Would that be a loophole? Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Ben Chen. There are several practical questions. I will attempt to answer you. Now, according to the interpretation of the bill, any companies or any platforms which accept online booking through the internet or telecommunication should obtain a license. Booking a call through telephone is also covered by the bill. Now, as mentioned in my answer towards Mr. Chen Puilan's question, there are existing consoles for booking a taxi. So the taxi license allows the driver to offer the vehicle for hire. So that kind of license is not covered by this new regulatory regime. However, if a platform offers booking service for private car as well as booking a taxi, then the platform will need to obtain a license. Secretary, my apologies. I mean operators of limousine. Now they would receive booking through phone calls. So in the future, for limousine renter, will they be covered by this regulatory regime? It depends on the license class of the vehicle. For limousine and cross-boundary vehicles for hire, if they already have a license issued under the existing legislation, then they can operate the business legally. Even if they receive booking through online platform or through a phone calls, they do not need to obtain a platform license. Now, if a private car driver receive booking from customers in private after the regulatory regime is put in place, this practice will be outlawed because the booking is not made through a licensed platform. Then that would be offering the vehicle for hire illegally. So in terms of enforcement, we will enforce the law through complaints and sting operation. There will be a penalty for this kind of behavior. For aggregated platform, through the future licensing platforms, we will make distinction between ordinary platforms and aggregator platforms. We will tailor-make a regulatory model which can fit aggregated platform so that they cannot delegate or outsource their liabilities. Mr. Adrian Ho. Thank you, Chairman. Just very briefly, a suggestion for the Secretary and a question. Now, the taxi industry is in a dire straits. The income of taxi drivers has plummeted. So in deciding the number of vehicle permits to issue, please take into consideration the difficulties faced by the taxi industry. Now, concerning tying the drivers to the vehicles, as a passenger, it is very difficult to distinguish whether the driver is the vehicle owner himself. So besides sting operation and complaints, what other methods are there to prevent lawbreakers from exploiting this loophole? Thank you. Secretary, on the first question or suggestion, deciding the detailed rules, including the permit numbers, we consider four factors: traveling experience, the high efficiency of the public transport system, carrying capacity of the road, and also complementarity and also healthy competition in the point-to-point transport service industry. So we will pay attention to the developments of the taxi industry and strive for complementary development. Now, concerning lawbreakers providing services without a license, the platforms have a responsibility to conduct due diligence. We expect the platforms to make use of technologies and other methods to ensure the drivers are indeed the owners of the vehicle and are properly licensed. So I'm aware that in places like the mainland, technology like facial recognition is being used to check the identity of the driver. Whenever the driver is online, the platform would require facial recognition of the driver. And the app would prompt the driver to log in again regularly. And also on the app, the profile picture of the driver would be required. Mr. Rin Kong. Thank you. Secretary, when making the regulations concerning the price setting for each journey or each trip, will the government require a certain extent of transparency? The pricing model would affect the income of taxi drivers. Competition needs to take place on a fair platform. Say, for example, in Japan, when setting the price for each trip of the online hailing journey, the government would have a say. Now, the bill says that the Secretary may make regulation to restrict or require the platform to store data in a certain format. Now, in the past, there were some platforms overseas which sold the data to other companies. So will the government learn from the mainland requirements to require the online platform to establish a server in Hong Kong? All the relevant passenger data should only be stored and used in Hong Kong. That will more effectively put the usage of data under our monitoring. Now, concerning the requirements of drivers driving their own car, registered owner and beneficiary owner are two different concepts. So how can you ensure that the vehicle owner will not bypass the law through trustees and so on? Now, will the vehicle owners of these cars be required to obtain a business registration? Secretary. Thank you, Ms. Kong. Now, concerning price of trips. Now, in overseas places, if you call a ride through this platform, the fare arrangement is very clear, depending on the origin and the destination, and also the brand of the vehicle, and also the time period. The fare would be adjusted. Now, you can also compare the different fares between different platforms. The range of fare is clearly visible. Now, in the end, when you choose a car, the app would ask the passenger to confirm the fare. So that's a requirement we will impose on the future platforms. Now, we will make reference to these experience and requirements in order to protect the interests of the consumers. Concerning the privacy of data and security of data, we attach importance to data security. The operation of the platforms would involve personal data. Now, in the bill, we will require platforms to collect, store, and make available these information for the Secretary's inspection. And also, the platforms will have to comply with existing requirements under the Personal Data Privacy Ordinance. Now, in terms of using and storing personal data in Hong Kong, whether these data are stored in Hong Kong or elsewhere, the companies still need to comply with the relevant requirements. We have also explored with the platforms concerning the establishments of servers and the locations of servers for these data. Now, any arrangements which can enhance data security will be considered. At the same time, we must be aware that many of these platforms have been operating for a long time at a large scale overseas. Now, compared with the existing markets, the Hong Kong market is relatively small. So in terms of operation, some data may be stored as their headquarters. So we must be sure that the requirements are feasible and practical. Thank you.
Last member to speak, Mr. Gary Chang. We will extend the meeting by a few more minutes, if there's no objection. Mr. Gary Chang. Thank you. I'd like to follow up on my last question in the last round. I know that we're empowering the commissioner to set an upper limit on the number of vehicle permits to be issued. As to how much idling capacity will be released, it hinges on how many vehicles are in actual operation. We need some tools to give full play to our idle capacity among private cars. That's why I ask if the administration will charge different platforms different fees based on varying factors, say for example the number of journeys they offer. Second, I'd like to follow up on the question regarding cross-boundary vehicles. Unless the vehicle is licensed for traveling to both the mainland and Hong Kong, no vehicles will be able to carry passengers for reward from the mainland to Hong Kong or vice versa, unless they are mainland officials. Secretary, thank you. For cross-boundary licenses and permits, say for example those under northbound travel for Hong Kong vehicles, there are conditions imposed upon them. They should not be carrying passengers for higher reward. Unless the vehicles obtain permits to offer ride-hailing services, they are illegal if they want to carry passenger for reward, and they must offer their ride-hailing services through designated platforms. Second, I do agree that we have to be more dynamic in determining the number of permits to be issued. We understand that the ride-hailing platforms need to have sufficient vehicles to offer quality service. Upon passage of the principal ordinance, we will work on the details. We will talk to drivers, platforms, and the community. To look into what parameters we should set and what factors we should consider, so that we can strive a balance. We need to make sure that the regime is operable and feasible. The ride-hailing platforms and taxis should coexist, and they should complement each other in terms of their strengths. Secretary, well, Mr. Frankie Yik would like you to answer his questions. I understand that his questions are rather complicated and require more time. If you cannot answer all the questions, you can leave it for the next meeting. I'd like to answer the question on a taxi fleet, because Mr. Yik asked 4 different questions. The bill is about regulating ride-hailing vehicles. We want to adopt a people-oriented approach. We want the taxi trade and the ride-hailing services to complement each other. We're still working on the taxi fleet regime. It's been launched, and we have to make sure that it survives and continue to prosper. We will continue to work on recruiting more drivers. We do have a working group on taxi driver quality under the Transport Department, and we have devised multiple measures to recruit more taxi drivers. Say, for example, we have simplified the written test for taxi trade. For the platforms under the taxi fleet regime, the government will try to work on identifying developers to establish a larger platforms to consolidate different taxi fleets of different scale. Hopefully, we can have a single platform with different taxi fleets to make more options available for the people. We will continue to promote the healthy development of the taxi trade. We'll not ignore the trade, even if we are regulating the ride-hailing services. For any support measures, any facilities, say for example chargers, laybys at boundary control points, financing needs of the taxi trade, if they have any needs or demand, the Transport Department will try their best to cater to them. The member also asked about statutory fares. Taxi can accept street hailing, and they have also a taxi stand. They have real-time interactions with passengers. That's why we put in place a statutory fares for taxis to prevent disputes between drivers and passengers. For ride-hailing platforms, well, this is a trend across the globe. Through algorithms, a fare can be determined by the platform. I think that we should respect the market instead of setting statutory fares. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.